In a moment, Claire will give you a very brief overview of what the scheme looks like and what the broad criteria are for people to apply. I guess just to give a little bit of background, Claire and Matt and the team and Becca, who I know is on the call as well, have been doing a huge amount of work in the last 5 or 6 weeks. There's been many sessions with central government to try to show them how important this issue is and how important it is for lots of small businesses that are the bedrock of the economy in the city here, but also across the country. That lobbying has obviously been successful. They have made some money available. Obviously, there's not as much money as we would like, and we'll probably get into that a bit more. But I think certainly from me and from TechSPARK, there's a sort of huge vote of thanks for Claire and Matt and Becca, because there's been lots and lots of work gone into this behind the scenes, which isn't really anybody's individual job. It's just something that people are really passionate about and has made a huge difference. So I'm super appreciative. I'll hand over to Claire now to sort of explain a bit about the programme that we have at the moment and the criteria. But if people want to start dropping into the chat particular questions that they have around what they're doing and whether they're eligible and any queries they have, what I'll do is I'll keep track of those and I will relay them to Claire so she can concentrate on the answers rather than be spending all of her time looking at chat. So Claire, over to you if you'd like to describe a bit of what the scheme is.
Thanks, Ben. So the scheme has been introduced as an extension, a new pot of money for businesses who missed out from the original 2 grant schemes, the Small Business Rate Relief Grant and the Hospitality Retail Leisure Grant, that was based on business rates and the rateable value of the premises. So this is a new fund, but it's the grant allocations to each local authority is based on their spend under the original 2 schemes. There is not enough money. It's 5% of the amounts the local authorities thought they were going to spend on the original 2 schemes, as per the return they gave to central government at the start of this current month, plus underspends from that original scheme that won't be spent because not everyone that they thought was eligible actually ended up being eligible. So there's a discrete pot of money, and there are 4 identified groups that central government have sort of indicated local authorities are supposed to prioritise, one of which are the workspaces, which is brilliant. The problem is that another 3 random groups have been added in, so market traders like street traders, B&Bs, and then charity shops. So local authorities now have 4 needy groups, and the level of need will vary enormously, and they've got insufficient money to spend, and they've got lots of discretion. So Business West have been working in our region, so that's Bath and North East Somerset, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire and Bristol, to pull together a regional approach for all those different local authorities that are quite different, different proportions of workspace tenant businesses, to get a regional approach. And the idea was that the portal was supposed to go live yesterday. The portals are not live yet. Each local authority has their own portal, and if your business premises for which you're claiming the grant, not where you live, but where your business premises is, you're to go to the local authority's portal and apply there. It's going to be open for 2 weeks, with the idea that all the applications will be received within that 2 weeks, and then the local authority will allocate based on need. So the proportion of which we understand that they're going to prioritise based on impacts, like in terms of income, which comes down to the need for evidence. So there will be a degree of documentation you have to upload with your application, one of which will be some financial information to show the impact on your income for the period, this recent period compared to 12 months prior. So yeah, you have to apply for it. It's not automatic. There are eligibility criteria, which we can talk through in a little more depth in a minute, but it's all about property costs, fixed property costs. So rent under a lease agreement is the sort of typical one we're looking at, but there might be a few sort of quirky ones out there. And then the local authority will, once the window is closed, a 2-week window, will be allocating and then responding to applicants to say whether they've been successful or not. The grant award will be based on the number of employees. So the smaller businesses, if they have an employee count of 10 or less, then they will receive £2,500. And if they are more than 10 but less than 50, they'll get £5,000, which I totally appreciate is less than the original grant scheme, which was 10 and £25,000. I'm going to stop and start answering some questions.
So,
got any?
We do. A couple of people are struggling to hear, and I've suggested they refresh their screen, because I can hear and I know some people can. So I'm not quite sure what's happening with the tech there. We're also recording this, so we can share the recording with everybody that's on the call as well. Yeah. So the first question is from Ashley, who runs Unit DX, who are a science incubator based pretty much in the city centre. They have labs which have multiple users, and those tenants weren't eligible for an SBRR grant.
Yeah.
However, the companies do have defined areas within the labs, just not a whole room to themselves, so not 4 walls and a door. Yeah. They also have office occupiers who have a number of desks allocated in a shared space, but not a defined area. So how are we defining area for as far as this grant is concerned?
Yeah, so the guidance was quite vague, that local authorities have had to use in their planning processes. So the 4 West of England authorities have decided to focus on whether you have exclusive use of the space. So the floating hot deskers, they have been effectively screened out of this process because it's just too difficult for the local authorities to work out who is actually who has that sort of arrangement, and the amounts of money, just there wasn't enough money in the pot, and that was realised quite early on. So if you have entitlement to use a space but that space is not defined, then we would not expect that to qualify under the approach taken in the West of England. If you've got exclusive use of a space, but like you've got a large room and you've got, like, I don't know, a set area within on a long bench, for example, but you have exclusive use of your area within that room, we'd expect that to qualify. There is the term unit is used in the West of England agreed guidance that I've seen, but it's not yet published online because the portal's not yet open. So unit, the local authorities are taking a relatively open approach to that. So it doesn't mean you have to have your own door that you can lock, although that will clearly qualify. But if there is shared space and you don't have your own specific area, then again, we expect that to fall out with the eligibility, unfortunately. You've also got to have a lease, so it's all about your lease agreement with the landlord and whether that does grant you that exclusive right of use. So again, if it's not for a specific area, then the lease will not mention a specific area, and therefore that's documentation that you need to provide, and you won't have it. So you probably won't be successful. And I'm really sorry about that. We have had to work quite hard to limit the generosity of the scheme for the workspace, the non-workspace tenants. So we've worked quite hard to make sure that charity shops don't clean up in this process. But we have had to accept a number of compromises on the workspace tenant side as well, as a sort of to make up for that. And one of the exclusions is that if you don't have a specific area, then you can't qualify.
So Brendan has asked a question which I flows naturally from that, really. So the government website was originally talking about giving out grants to the value of £25,000, £10,000, or any amount under £10,000.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about either £2,500 or £5,000. Can you just give a bit of clarity around that?
Yeah, so when the government first put the guidance out, and there's been multiple versions of the guidance, because it's changed quite a lot over time, they were drawing analogies to the previous schemes, like the original schemes, which were £10,000 and £25,000 respectively. It became really obvious straight away to us that there was not enough money in order to make grant awards of that value. And if local authorities were to make grant awards of that value, then hardly anyone would actually get anything at all. So the local authorities have taken the decision as a collective and got this agreed by all the councillors, that in order to share the benefit amongst as wide a group of eligible needy businesses as possible that can demonstrate the significant income drop, then they will be making small rewards to more people rather than large rewards to hardly anyone. That is a decision that they took. So there just isn't enough money in the pot to give people £25,000. It's just not. That was always the implication, and the government guidance has been really quite unhelpful in this. That they've raised that level of expectation that the grants could be equivalent to the original scheme, whereas then they've decided not to fund it properly at all. So the local authorities will be collecting and reporting back to government all the businesses who were eligible. However, they've lost out because they've just run out of money. And we have already made the point to the Minister for Small Business that we've massively curtailed the generosity of each grant, and we still expect it to be multiple times oversubscribed. So we have been raising this at every opportunity to government to influence their decision and to properly fund the scheme.
And I think it's fair to say, I'm not sure whether the local authorities are publishing the exact amounts they've been given, but just the people who have signed this petition would be, if we were giving out £10,000 and £25,000, would be more than the money available, not even including the presumably other hundreds and thousands of businesses who are now eligible. So it really is a huge issue. Yeah. Jim has asked a question, Eric has asked a question, which I'm hoping is pretty quick. So his business is registered in Spike Island, and they're an industrial design and innovation consultancy. Does that matter? Do you need to be a managed workspace tenant? Do you need to be within a certain sector, or just anyone that's a managed workspace tenant?
So it's not specific to any sector. So there isn't different grant awards for different sectors, and no sectors are excluded. The physical location of the workspace is the important thing, so that determines which local authority you apply to. Great.
Jim has asked a question which you may well not have the answer to. What do you feel the likelihood is of being awarded the grant? So what percentage are you likely to be to get the grant? And will the grants be subject to VAT or tax?
Definitely the grant will not be subject to VAT. It will count as income for, if you're unincorporated, it will count towards like your revenue for income tax and national insurance, like class 4. And if you're a company, it will count towards income for the purposes of corporation tax. In terms of what your likelihood of getting the grant is, it's obviously higher than it would have been had the grants been more generous, but like, I'm going to be a bit like a broken record. There is not enough money in the pot to go around to everyone, which is why it's really important that businesses demonstrate the impact for their income impact as a result of COVID-19 to get their application higher, and then the council will be working from the top of the list and the most impacted first, going down the list. I mean, it's worth saying the local authorities do have discretion to make grants to other businesses and other organisations out with the 4 categories that central government have sort of mandated that they prioritise, although there's not enough money in the pot, so that discretion is not real. And local authorities are really going to be struggling to even fund a proportion of the 4 groups, only one of which is the subject of this discussion. So I'm hopeful that the scheme will be oversubscribed. We'll be able to report that back to central government, and central government will give more money available, but that money will come down the track later, and maybe too late for some businesses if they're under real distress. So yeah, it's a perfect system at all.
So Ollie has a question. Ollie is a tenant at the Bottle Yard, amongst quite a few tenants at the Bottle Yard. The Bottle Yard as a centre is owned by Bristol City Council. Will these tenants still be covered in the scheme?
Doesn't matter who your landlord is, whether it's the local authority or whether it's a private landlord. The only thing is, were you trading on the 11th of March, which is the same criteria as was in the original scheme? Do you have a lease for a specific area? And are you continuing to trade? If you ceased trading after the 11th of March, but you had a lease, you still don't get the grant. But it doesn't matter. So you're not excluded from the scheme because your local authority is also your landlord.
So Eric and Steve have sort of similar questions, and I guess it's just a bit more clarity on one of the answers you've already given. So Eric was asking, if you have a fixed desk within a bigger room, are you eligible? So it's similar to Ashley's question about having a fixed set of area in a lab, I guess.
Yeah, so if it's a specific area and you have exclusive use, there's no minimum floor space type rule yet. I mean, the local authority might have to go down that route if they are massively oversubscribed and they're really struggling to distinguish between different candidates for support. But at the moment, there's no minimum size or minimum rental amount. It's just about exclusive use or not. And
in terms of when you say lease, is a license going to be treated as the same thing?
Yeah, so sorry, I talk about lease, but a license to occupy or lease in whatever form, like legal form. So the local authorities are not being prescriptive about the type of document you've got, as long as it meets the criteria of it gives you exclusive use.
Yeah. So Paula has just been asking, she has a tattoo studio within a creative shared workspace. She doesn't have any employees. She would have received a £10,000 retail grant if she'd been in a retail space, but didn't. So the maximum that she can now get is £2,500.
Yeah. Based on employees.
Yeah. Chris from SR2 is asking, their business isn't yet 3 years old, but they're growing. So if he looked at a like-for-like comparison, the impact wouldn't look so great because they've grown a lot since in the last 12 months. So if he compared February and March this year versus April and May, then the impact would be more clear. So how flexible will the local authorities be when they're looking at that type of thing?
So the local authorities have said that they're going to be looking for a like-for-like period compared to last year. That obviously does mask the growing business impact. I would suggest that in the application you do a 4 months, the last 3 or 4 months, and then the most immediate period pre-impact, as well as the like-for-like last year period. And I do understand there's going to be like a small chat box, like character limited, so you can't write War and Peace, but just to explain some, like, give supplementary information. And I would definitely make that point that you're a growing business, and that's why you've provided additional documentation to show the impact compared to like the pre-lockdown period.
Cool.
It can't do any harm, right?
So Ant has a similar question. Ant gives an example of running classes throughout the year, but having to cancel these for 2020. But they might not have been exactly the same classes in 2019, so the comparison period isn't the same.
Okay.
They might have been later in the year in 2019.
Okay. So I mean that's why the local authorities are going to look like 2020 versus 2019 on the basis that, like, seasonal businesses, if you've got some seasonal variation. I think the main reference period that the local authority is going to be looking at is the equivalent months of last year, and whether your business would have started the season earlier this year or not is a bit sort of difficult to prove, right? I would try to give the 12 months of sort of pattern of activity for last year, and then the months to date for this year, and make the point that you've had to cancel all the bookings for this year after the lockdown started.
Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with my questions. Rob has a question, which is a bit easier for you, hopefully, because it's a bit more cut and dried. They have a lease on an office which they use for their core activities, but they also rent another office space which they use for storage. Will they be able to apply for separate claims for both, or does 2 spaces exclude them?
I need to go back and check, actually, because there's some frequently asked questions that the government's just released a lot, and there is a FAQ on this about, you've got 2 spaces, can you claim for both? And the government guidance, the central government guidance, says yes, you should be able to, but I can't remember what the regional approach was.
I know originally the regional approach that Matt talked to me about on Friday was you can only have 1 claim across the rest of England.
I think that's where we ended up. I'm happy to take that away and check and revert on that particular point. But my fear, I'm pretty sure that actually we said 1 per business. Again, just to manage the number of claims, right?
Yeah, and I think, Rob, where this came from is there are charities in the region who might have 10 different charity shops across the 4 local authorities. So it's more for those types of businesses who would have lots and lots of claims, but obviously people do get captured in that. And a similar question from Tim. They have two separate companies that operate out of the same space. Both of the companies are owned and operated by the same directors, but have different staff. However, only one of the companies pays rent. The other's still too poor. Do you think both these companies might be able to apply, or just the one company that holds the tenancy?
If there's only one tenancy, like one lease, I can't see how the other could apply. Again, back up, I think it's the other way around to the one business, two premises. You've got two businesses, and if you've got one premise and basically they share the space, I think the answer is you get one, but you might be able to aggregate the employee numbers, because basically, as long as the businesses aren't doing totally different things, so you might get into the £5,000 bracket rather than 2,500 by aggregating the employees on the basis that they share the space, but work for like two different brands or, you know, legal companies. But it's all about leases, right? So the second company definitely can't apply, and the only question is how generous is the first, the application for the first company with the actual lease.
Cool. Edwin helps run the site at Meriton Foundry, where they have 58 units on the site. None of these have been eligible previously and haven't really had very much meaningful support from government. They do all have exclusive use clearly defined on their licenses. However, the main part of the site opened in October last year, so most won't have financial records going back a year. Will these still be eligible?
So the government guidance says as long as you're trading on the 11th of March, you're eligible. Again, back to the demonstrating economic impact and other reference periods equivalent. I think if the businesses, the tenants within that space are really quite young and they don't have equivalent records, my advice is to provide the most recent, like the lockdown period, and the records as far back as you can, to show the economic impact. And I completely get the October, November, December might not be equivalent to like April, May, June, but and then in the little chat box, maybe note that there aren't equivalent records for the same period last year.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the local authority will view that. I don't know whether they'll just do a percentage impact between those periods or quite what they're going to do.
So Paula...
Sorry, just to build on that, so the grant is designed for the tenant of the space, not the landlord. That might be implicit in the chat, but the support is not focused on the owner of the space who's paying the business rates. It's for the tenants.
So Paula, who I think runs the tattoo studio from memory, has just asked a couple of follow-up questions. So she just wants to clarify that this fund isn't a top-up of the old fund, it's separate. So it can't be tapped to top up previous businesses who may have expected to get £10,000, because she obviously has had to be legally closed since March and can't tattoo people for obvious reasons.
So it's the other way around. So this scheme is like an extension of the old. So to fund this scheme, underspends from the old can be used if they haven't already been spent. Plus there's this 5% of the money that the local authority thought they were going to spend on the old scheme that's genuinely new money. If there's an overspend on the original scheme, that is for central government to top up rather than clawing back from this discretionary new scheme. So yeah, the moving of money can go one way only, and that's to top up this scheme rather than to impoverish it further.
But in terms of if you've been excluded on a technicality because you would have been what would be considered a retail business, but you're not in a retail unit and paying SBRR, they're not going to change the rules and say, well, actually, you should be getting 25 grand. It's 2.5 grand or nothing.
It's 2.5 grand or nothing, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other exclusion for the new scheme, the discretionary scheme, is that you weren't eligible for the original. So you can't claim under the new because you didn't get round to claim under the old. You are to claim under the old and you're excluded from the new.
Yeah. So Rob has asked, he helps run a community interest company. Are there any restrictions on the types of companies that are able to apply?
No.
No. Great. Because that would apply to us, and I haven't considered it before. So Brendan's just following up with a question on their specifics. So with their financials, their revenue is down a lot, but they've used directors' loans to pay the bills. So the statement for the bank would show a similar amount of money in the bank. Should they just note that in their applications?
Yeah. So the directors have loaned the business some money to pay the bills because the revenue is down. That seems perfect evidence that there's been a significant impact. And the loan will have to be repaid at some point by the business to the director. So that's not revenue under any classification. So, but just note it because the local authorities might not be experts in terms of director loan accounts and that sort of accounting entry. So it is worth noting it.
Great. Ian has a leisure business that's entirely seasonal. They take bookings and 25% deposits. So the deposits tend to come in March and April, but the activity doesn't tend to happen in the balance until May to July. Is there any discretion for entirely seasonal businesses as the figures from February to April don't actually reflect the seasonal nature of the business?
I don't know how local authorities are going to judge that, to be honest. I worry a little bit that they will potentially think that, in a couple of months this will all be over and you'll be able to deliver your service to your customers, and therefore they'll be paying full whack for that. And so, again, worth noting in the comments section, and the fact that the income is a deposit for which the service will be provided later or refunded, presumably if lockdown continues and they're not able to open this year. But I don't actually know how that plays into this process in terms of evidencing economic impact, because that's a nuanced level that we didn't get to in the discussions with the local authorities.
So Rob is asking, particularly around the employee count, is this based on PAYE as of March? They employ a significant number of regular freelancers, and I know that's a similar challenge with lots of digital and creative businesses.
So unfortunately, it's based on PAYE numbers, because that's the only thing that you're making like regular data returns to HMRC in relation to. I totally understand the fact that businesses in these sectors make a significant have a significant part of their workforce that are freelancers or contractors, i.e. not employees. but the local authority needed something they could verify, and employees, they can verify, whereas they really couldn't get their head round, like contractors, and how you'd evidence the size of the business. The employees is just being used to try to give more help to slightly larger businesses. But yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. There's a massive cliff edge at between 10 and 11 employees, which everyone acknowledges. We've just tried to do our best to get the local authorities something they can verify, because they've got assurance processes that they have to complete to report back to government. So apologies on that.
And a couple of follow-up questions from people I've had email on a similar thing. So when they say employees, is that full-time equivalent, or is that if you're in the system as an employee, whether it's on 0 hours or full-time?
It ought to be full-time equivalent, because that's what makes sense for lots of other government schemes, but it's actually just warm body count. So it's how many people have you got on PAYE, whether they work 1 hour or 100 hours a month.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful or not, but yeah, you're not counting fractions of people. You're counting one person equals one employee.
Yeah. And in terms of if you're a small company but have people offshore, so if you have, say, 7 or 8 people based here in a site, but also have a site somewhere else in Europe where you have another 10 people, it's just the UK employees that count?
I think so. I mean, the original scheme was based. The original schemes were based on businesses that were like UK based, UK focused. I don't think you can count employees that basically work overseas, because they again won't be on the HMRC return. I don't think they should be on local payroll. Not quite sure, but I suspect the answer is UK employees only, rather than offshore.
Presumably,
and again,
anything that's complicating the application is going to make it more difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, we say companies, but we don't really mean companies, we mean business, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're incorporated or unincorporated, whether you're a partnership, sole trader, any of that jazz.
So Daniel's asking, does a rented storage unit count?
Yes. If it's your business, if it has some link to your business, if that makes sense. So I have a rented storage unit, right? But I'm not in business. So if you're storing stock in this storage unit, then yes. If you've got more stuff than you can fit in your house and it's got no link to your business, then no.
Yeah.
Because you've got exclusive use and you're trading on the 11th. So all the other criteria have to be met, but if those criteria have been met, then yes.
Yeah. So Ant is asking, what exactly is the period that we need to show the figures for? Has it been defined by the guidance?
Let me go and just double check, because this was the subject of quite a lot of last minute wrangling between the local authorities. So keep talking, I'm listening. But I just need to confirm the final, where we got to in the end.
Yeah. So Edwin has mentioned that it just seems really unjust that identical businesses are receiving entirely separate amounts of money for no real reason. We completely agree. That's partly why we started the petition and why we've had so many conversations with government, because it is based on the technicality and there's no logic to it. They've just seized on business rates as the only way they can quickly push something out. unfortunately, the amount of money that's been made available is simply not enough. So the local authorities have really been put in a bind around, do they give out the same amount of money to a much smaller number of businesses, or try to help as many businesses as possible? And that's an impossible question, really. They've decided to try and help as many people as possible, but we completely sympathise. I certainly sympathise because we're in the same boat. I would have assumed we would have got a grant as a very small not-for-profit, and we haven't. But we and Matt and Claire continue to lobby central government and politicians in the hope that more money will come. And if more money does come, hopefully more will be able to go through to the businesses. It's a horrible scenario, but it is where we are.
It is. Back on the income reference periods, I've just checked the guidance, which is near final and about to be published when the portal goes live, and actually talks about February to April 2020 compared to the equivalent months last year. So I'm going to go back to the local authorities going, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I can't say that I remember. I don't know whether it's always said that and I just didn't notice until now. But obviously I'll be going back going, hello, this problem started in March. Why are we looking at February? And also we're still in it and we're a long way past April now. So I'm going to go back to the group, the local authority group, and say February to April, does this really make sense? So I would advise, for the purposes of this webinar and any follow-up comms that we put out, I'll be re-emphasising this, if you can get a monthly breakdown of income up to the point that, you know, the most recent information that your bank will give you as per bank statements or whatever, I'd be providing that. I wouldn't be looking just at February to April because that's slightly bizarre, but I'll be following up with the local authorities on that.
Yeah. So we have 7 minutes left. I have a feeling that our system throws us out afterwards. If there's any questions we don't get to, we have access to the chat. So what I'll do is make sure Claire has those, and we'll come back to you via email as well. But yeah, just in case it suddenly shuts down and throws everybody out. So Aidan had a question. They're a charity, but their business is rated above 51k. So they don't qualify for the business rates holiday. So they've not had any support. That's despite them being a gallery and a charity. They had hoped that this would allow them to apply. But is it only open to people who wouldn't be eligible for business rates normally?
I'm really sorry, but I think the answer is you're not going to be able to apply. You're not going to be eligible for this scheme because you have a business rates liability in your own right. So there is obviously a cut-off at 51,000 if you're in the retail, hospitality or leisure sector, which you would be because you're a gallery. There is a campaign being run and sponsored by some of the London councils called Raise the Bar. I mean, Business West doesn't have a position on this, but they are lobbying central government to increase the cut-off for the retail, hospitality and leisure folk on the basis that certain units, they do pay business rates, but they're in a very expensive area of the country, such as Bristol also counts that. And they're wanting that cut-off that's currently 51,000 to be up to 150,000, I think. I'm not super close to the initiative, but it might be worth signing, like being a signatory to that campaign. But the answer, I think, for the discretionary fund pot is I don't think you're going to be eligible. Like I say, the local authority does have discretion, but they don't have any money to exercise any discretion. So I think that they're not going to be able to help you out even if they wanted to. Might be worth writing to the council on that front.
Yeah. So Rob has a question about the PAYE.
Yeah.
So is it a snapshot of March or is it ongoing? So as a business, they have lots of people who are employed on a short-term basis and do on the payroll. So for specific projects, often weeks, not months. So in theory, they employed more than 200 staff in summer, supporting 4,000 volunteers, but there's only 4 staff on the payroll full-time.
Yeah, I'm just checking what it said in the guidance and how. So the guidance says a person who has received remuneration via payroll system in the last 6 months up to March the 11th, 2020.
Cool. So I guess, Rob, you'll need to specifically look, because if you have more than 49 employees, you're not eligible because the system thinks you employ more than 50 people. Very quickly, Alice is just asking for clarification. Is the maximum per organisation £2,500?
No, you can get £5,000 if you have 11 to 50 employees. So the cut-off is 50.
Yeah. Cool. And Ollie is asking when people can apply and will it be through the local authority websites?
Yeah, so each local authority, based on postcode of like the actual address of the property, will be launching their own portal on the website, and those will be going live as soon as possible. The ambition was, actually yesterday. The ambition is now by the end of today, and it'll be open for 2 weeks. So it's not a fastest finger first, but also don't wait more than 2 weeks because it will close. And they will be doing comms about this via different forms of media to make sure that everyone's aware. But yes, you have to apply. It's not automatic.
And I think once they are open and we have the links, we'll try to share them with people. Hopefully that'll be this afternoon, but we'll see where we get to.
Yeah, we're going to put the links and stuff and copies of the guidance on our Trading Through Coronavirus website area. It's a bit of a hub of different blogs and stuff. So yeah, and get in touch with the team if you've got follow-up queries. I'll put my email address quickly in the chat box.
So particularly to Ashley and a couple of the other people who run spaces, we're really conscious this doesn't directly help spaces. We are doing other things to help with that. I had a call this morning, and we're continuing to lobby on that because we are very aware of how important they are to the community, and we'll continue to try and do things on that. And I imagine some of the space providers will probably talk about that on the Bristol and Bath Network breakfast next week, first Friday. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I hope that's been useful. It's quite a complicated scheme, so thank you so much for Claire for being all over it and understanding it properly, because there's lots of pitfalls in there, and I hope everybody is able to get at least some support, even if it's not as much support as you would like. And I think that's pretty much it from us. So thank you very much, and we will hopefully see you all soon. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. It's been great to talk to you virtually.